I'm Rich Purseglove, and for the past 15 years, we've built HMO portfolios for our clients, many of which live on the other side of the world and have never set foot in the properties that they own. BBC Radio 4 turned up at one of our HMOs last week. It was Evan Davies, the ex-Dragon's Den presenter, who now presents Today's Show on BBC Radio 4, where he interviews politicians and MPs. So why would Evan Davies be interested in coming to a HMO in Ashfield?
Sort of things people are concerned about.
HMOs is a big one, big problem. The antisocial behaviour that comes with HMOs.
That's a sitting MP saying that HMOs are one of the biggest problems in his constituency. And he's not entirely wrong about the problems. Many MPs across the country are saying the same things. But are HMOs the problem, or is this a manifestation of something else happening in the background? Well, what the BBC came to investigate, and what I'm going to talk to you about in this video, is the very thing that's costing hands-off HMO landlords tens of thousands of pounds a year and adding compliance risk that could get you into lots of trouble, even prison time. So if you own a HMO or you're thinking about investing in one in the next 12 months, this video could save you more than most property courses cost. We've developed and managed millions of pounds worth of HMOs, so we feel this makes us an authority in our industry, and our results speak for themselves. In this video, I'm going to talk about one single metric that I believe is behind the problems that we see in HMOs, and it's the thing that's costing HMO investors and landlords tens of thousands, and in some cases hundreds of thousands of pounds. So I got a message to say that a BBC producer had called, and initially I just thought it was a scam, but it turned out to be legit, and they wanted to come and view one of our HMOs as they were doing a piece locally in Ashfield where they were coming to talk to Reform MP Lee Anderson about the problems that HMOs are causing in his constituency. He said that HMOs are a blight on society, and barely a week goes by where his inbox is not full of complaints in the local area.
HMOs that are aimed at, as you say, NHS
It's always been
workers.
a problem in this area, and it's usually a landlord from London that's never been up here that's bought the property, and they'll stick 4 or 5 young lads in that cause mayhem on that street.
So I invited them to come and have a look at one of our HMOs. Fast forward a few days and we were on site at one of our HMOs. It's a property that we were involved in the development of, and we've managed it every day since the very beginning. The owners of the property live overseas, so there's very little input from them in terms of operational management. The property started life as a detached 3-bedroom family home, and with significant development, it's now an 8-bed, all-en-suite HMO, and the floor plan has pretty much doubled in size. We gave Evan and his team a tour through the property. We showed them the privacy locks on the doors, all of the different compliance elements, the commercial fire alarm system, the communal kitchen, all of the elements that have been designed for tenants to live together in a small community without conflict. And then Evan spoke to one of our tenants, Tim.
Right, I'm nearly 63 now. I had a failed relationship and I wanted a property, and this one fell lucky for me because it's local as well.
So you've got a basic room,
Yeah.
sizable bedroom, and a bathroom of your own. What are you paying for this each month?
Can I tell you really?
Yeah.
155 a week, but it's a godsend, honestly. I could rent somewhere, but the rest of the bills I couldn't afford. It's just nice. I've got everything I need. It's like, I can't, like I say, what I needed at the time. And like, you know, I thought it was going to be short term, but I'm thinking, well, no, this is nice. Because literally I live paycheck to paycheck. So this just falls in right with everything. What, you know, I know I pay 155 a week. I know everything's covered. So if I've got no work, at least I've got a roof over my head. So
Yeah.
I know it's not big or anything, but it's home.
It's not big or anything, but it's my home. That's what affordable housing should look like. And that's what Evan and his team saw. And after the interview, they said that they were genuinely impressed with what HMOs can look like when they're managed properly. So if one HMO is turning up in Lee Anderson's inbox as a problem on a weekly basis, and another one is being described as a godsend by the tenants who live there, what differentiates these properties? If you're enjoying the content so far, then you're exactly the person I've created my newsletter for. It's called The Perspective, Property Investment Without the Bullshit. There's no guru hype, no blueprints, no secret systems, just what's working and what's not. To subscribe, simply click the link below. The truth is, HMOs are not the problem. The management of HMOs is the problem. Let's talk about the numbers, because this is where it all starts, and this is what I couldn't explain in a 5-minute segment on the BBC show. Professional HMO management delivered by either a landlord or an agent that genuinely cares about the house and the tenants that live there will achieve 95% plus occupancy over the long period. In contrast, average HMO management by an agent who either doesn't have the experience or they genuinely don't care about who's living there will be lucky to achieve 85% over the long term. And that 10% difference is where the problems start. If we use Tim's room as the example at £155 a week, that 10% between 95 and 85% occupancy is just over 5 weeks of void periods every year. It actually equates to £806 lost per room per year. If we were to multiply that across all 8 rooms in that property, this equates to £6,400 of revenue that the landlord will never see. And this is not through investing in the wrong property or through a crash in the market. It's simply opting for cheap, average management. If you've got 3 HMOs with 6 beds in each, it's a total of 18 rooms, over a period of 5 years, that 10% difference in void period equates to between £60,000 and £70,000 in rent that's never received. That means that there's £60,000 to £70,000 of revenue that's not available to put back into maintaining the property and keeping it performing at its best. And let's not forget, that's just one metric, occupancy. If you've opted for cheaper average management, then as well as the void periods, you've got average referencing, which is going to lead to a higher risk of tenant profile. Therefore, you're going to increase rent arrears. You're also going to have average maintenance. So those little small leaks that don't get fixed turn into bigger problems where you have water leaking into light fittings, into smoke detectors, which then leads to decoration, electrical work, and what started as a small leak that could have been rectified in an hour on a DIY basis is now multiple contractors and thousands of pounds worth of work. And this is what I tried to get across to Evan and the BBC team, is that HMOs are not the problem. The management is the problem. And all we're seeing is the result of poorly managed businesses. Just like in any business, management is what makes the difference. It's the difference between a property that performs well, quietly in the background, providing steady income and a home for tenants over the long period, and one that ends up in the local MP's inbox week in, week out with antisocial behaviour, waste management issues, and just causing a general nuisance, as well as having a landlord in the background that is slowly hemorrhaging cash. And ultimately, this property is going to end up as a listing in the local property auction. After visiting our HMO, Evan and his team went over to Lee Anderson's constituency office in Sutton, Ashfield, and they talked about the problems with the HMOs, the antisocial behaviour, the waste management, problems from neighbours where properties are being developed and the neighbours are kept in the dark about what's happening on their street. He talked about absentee landlords, which is a common problem, landlords that live either in London or sometimes overseas, never visiting the properties. And to be clear, these are valid complaints because there are lots of HMOs up and down the country that are running this way. Investors cut corners, they over leverage on the mortgage, they find themselves not making the profit that they thought they were going to make, and ultimately then what they do is they look to the management and going for a cheaper option to try and save money, which is then a downward spiral and ultimately ends up in them having to sell the property and get out of the industry altogether. But what was interesting is, listen to what Lee Anderson had to say.
It should be for working people that's just moved into the area, struggling to find somewhere, got a job at the local hospital. And a lot of the nurses that come in and NHS staff do rely on that sort of quick, cheaper accommodation.
Even the MP, whose inbox is flooded with HMO complaints, say that HMOs should work and there is a place for them. I said to Evan and his team and to Lee Anderson in a subsequent meeting following the visit that the management of HMOs is the fundamental problem and why we're seeing the issues that we're seeing in the media. HMOs do have a purpose and they can solve some of our biggest housing challenges, but we have to get on top of the management issues. This is a pattern that we see over and over again. The landlord lives miles away from their property and they decide to self-manage in order to save money. And when the novelty wears off, the frequency at which they visit their property becomes less and less. And then over time, proactive maintenance becomes reactive maintenance, costs start to mount, tenants become dissatisfied. This is when voids creep in, and ultimately the property goes downhill. The demographic of the tenants change, and the landlord will end up selling, and the cycle starts again. So how does it look when it's done the right way? So it starts with a local presence. All of the HMOs that we manage are within 30 minutes of our office. So whoever's managing the property should be close enough to be able to attend at fairly short notice. Rigorous tenant vetting. So our referencing process goes way beyond what most third-party referencing agencies do. It should be treated more like a small investigation. So whoever's going to be living in the property, it should go beyond their employment checks, their credit checks, and the usual tick box exercise. we need to look at social media, we need to look at all other aspects, criminal convictions, as these people are going to live in a shared environment. And most importantly, introduce yourself to the neighbours. So if the neighbours know what's going on and you put their mind at ease, this tends to lead to a lot fewer problems down the line. When a property is purchased and it's being developed into a HMO and neighbours are kept in the dark, they naturally become fearful for who's going to live there. We introduce ourselves to all of the neighbours and give them a point of contact whenever there's a new development of a HMO. And the result of doing all this is that you end up with good community relations. You have tenants like Tim, where the HMO has changed his life, and you have investors in the background that are making good returns on their investment, and it becomes a long-term profitable investment. Now, some people watching this hear the term professional management and you might think, well, it's expensive. And it can be expensive in comparison to some of the cheaper operators out there. I've done the maths and I can assure you that going with a professional managing agent that's achieving 95% occupancy over a cheaper alternative that's only achieving 85% occupancy is a better financial decision. For every £1 you save by going for the cheaper option will cost you on average between £1.30 and £1.50 in increased voids alone. And that's not taking into account all of the other aspects that we've talked about. In fact, for the cheaper agent to actually save you money, they would have to charge less than 5% when taking into account the reduction in occupancy. And this is why cheap management could be one of the most expensive mistakes that you can make as a property investor. Here's what I actually said on air.
Because we are a managing agent, but I do think the management of HMOs is the fundamental thing that determines whether a HMO causes problems or not. We have licensing, and of course that works to some degree to make sure that the amenity standards and that the properties are compliant from a safety point of view, but the only people to police that are the council.
That's what actually made it on air, but there were 3 points that I didn't get to mention. Number 1, HMO licensing protects your tenants, but it doesn't necessarily protect your investment. HMO licensing and regulation is there to enforce minimum safety standards and amenity standards. It's not there to ensure that your property is profitable. You can have a perfectly licensed HMO that's still not making any money every month. It becomes a liability rather than an asset. Number 2, quick fortune property courses are creating failed investments. You've seen the adverts. £150,000 property purchase, turning it into a £30,000 a year income, or retire within 3 years through property investment. The reality is that well-intentioned people are borrowing far beyond their means and are stretching themselves both knowledge-wise and financially beyond what they're capable of in order to try and live up to these dreams and achieve what is being promised in the adverts. Through careful systemization and automation, you can make property relatively passive, but it is not truly a passive income. And those that are telling you that it is are usually trying to sell you something or telling lies. This doesn't just ruin reputation, it ruins people's financial futures and in some cases ruins their lives completely. It's true that well-run HMOs do yield better returns than standard single-let investments. However, it's very important that the management and everything around it is done properly and professionally in order to see those returns. If you're looking for quick wins or cash flow next month, then HMOs and probably property investment as a whole is not for you. And number 3, most investors grossly underestimate the amount of input required for professionally run HMOs. The courses that you see obsess about finding the deal, negotiating the deal, buying below market value, refinancing, adding value, development. Very few of them focus on what that property looks like in 12 months, 24 months time, when tenants are living there and you've long since moved on to the next deal. This is where the real profits are made in property. The BBC featured our HMO because for the last 15 years we've obsessed over that gap between how to buy the property and how to run it profitably for the long term. So if you're thinking about building a HMO portfolio, or maybe you've got HMOs that aren't quite performing in the way that you expected, then here's the 3 things I want you to take away. Number 1, professional management directly impacts your returns. Number 2, ignore the passive income fantasy. And number 3, think in decades, not in months. Your property portfolio should be a long-term investment, not a quick win. When done properly, HMOs solve real housing problems. They become homes for people like Tim, and they become long-term profitable investments, creating wealth for investors. And ultimately, that's the game we're in.